On a quiet residential street in Romeoville, Illinois, a routine welfare check on the evening of September 17, 2023, led police officers to a nightmarish discovery. Inside the modest home on Concord Avenue, they found an entire family brutally slain. 32-year-old Alberto Rolon, his 38-year-old wife, Zoraida Bartolome, and their two young sons, 9-year-old Adriel and 7-year-old Diego, all gone. In a chilling indication of the perpetrator's ruthlessness, even the family's 3 dogs had been eliminated. The victims had been executed, likely about a day before they were found. By September 20th, 2 more people would lay dead, and the shocking twist would be revealed to everyone. That is, everyone but the triggerman himself. Romeoville police immediately launched a major investigation into what they quickly determined was a targeted attack on this innocent family. Crime scene investigators spent countless hours gathering evidence from the house. By analyzing bullet casings, broken doors, and other clues, detectives surmised that this was an execution-style massacre, not some domestic dispute gone wrong. Early on, there was no obvious motive. The victims, by all accounts, were a close-knit family without known enemies. Investigators canvassed the area for surveillance footage and witnesses, while also examining the victims' personal lives for any hints of who might want to harm them. A significant breakthrough came when police learned that Zoraida Bartolome had been involved in a secret extramarital relationship. It emerged that Zoraida, who worked at a local engineering company, had developed a romance with a co-worker named Nathaniel Huey, a 32-year-old security guard. This revelation immediately cast Huey in a suspicious light. Here was a man with firearms training and a possible motive, a love triangle or jealousy, that could explain a targeted hit on the family. Investigators also discovered that Zoraida's husband, Alberto Rolon, had found out about the affair at some point and even slashed the tires on Huey's vehicle in retaliation. The affair was no secret to Huey's fiancée either. 50-year-old Ermelinda Palomo was well aware that her partner had been unfaithful with Zoraida. With these pieces of information, detectives began to theorize that the massacre might have been an act of revenge or rage linked to this tangled relationship. Investigators soon realized that the killer likely didn't act alone. Digital evidence and security footage suggested that 2 people were involved in carrying out the crime. The focus turned to the scorned lovers, Nathaniel Huey and Ermelinda Palomo, both of Streamwood, Illinois. On September 18, 2023, just one day after the slayings were discovered, police located Huey and Palomo and brought them in for questioning. During interviews, both denied any involvement in the killings and provided alibis for each other, with Palomo claiming she was asleep at home when the crime unfolded. Huey was evasive when pressed to hand over his cell phone or to take a polygraph test. He agreed in principle but refused to immediately turn over his phone, promising to drop it off later, which he never did. Lacking solid evidence at that moment, investigators had to release the pair. Nonetheless, Huey and Palomo were marked as key persons of interest, and police maintained surveillance while they worked to build a stronger case. As detectives dug deeper, a shocking twist emerged that transformed the case from a straightforward whodunit into something far more convoluted. Nathaniel Huey, initially presumed to be the prime mover behind the crime, turned out to have been an unwitting pawn in an elaborate scheme orchestrated by his own fiancée. Investigators uncovered a trove of digital communications, text messages, emails, and social media chats, revealing that Palomo had spent months manipulating Huey. She had done so in a calculated bid to eliminate her romantic rival. In fact, police would later conclude that Palomo began laying this deadly plan roughly a year earlier, soon after she discovered Huey's affair with Zoraida. Posing as members of a fictitious cartel, Palomo created multiple online personas to communicate with Huey. Through these fake identities, she convinced her fiancé that he had somehow become entangled in the dealings of a powerful Mexican cartel. For an added European flavor, she also created various Bulgarian personas, who were allegedly connected to transatlantic criminal networks. Huey was led to believe that he was essentially working for this cartel and that his own life would be in danger if he didn't follow orders. Using a messaging app, Palomo, pretending to be a big deal within a cartel, fed Huey false information that someone close to him was a quote-unquote mole plotting to attack him. In the days leading up to the attacks, Palomo's fabricated cartel messenger told Huey that the mole was none other than Zoraida Bartolome, the woman with whom he was involved. Palomo's manipulation preyed on Huey's fear and loyalty, as well as his apparently deficient reasoning abilities. He fully believed these threats were real, and never realized that the source of this dire warning was actually the woman he trusted at home. Under the cartel persona's direction, Huey and the so-called cartel connection began methodically planning what Huey thought was an assigned hit on the mole. They discussed every detail of the impending attack on Zoraida and her household. Messages show that Palomo, acting as the cartel member, instructed Huey on how to carry out the strike, and even how to stage the crime scene to mislead investigators. She advised him to make the attack look like a burglary gone wrong, suggesting that he ransack the home. To bolster his resolve, Palomo, through one of her alter egos, reassured Huey that he need not worry about getting caught. She implied that the local cops would know this was a cartel hit and not bother to investigate it, perhaps due to corruption. The web of deception was elaborate and carefully maintained. Palomo juggled multiple fake characters and kept Huey convinced that a shadowy organization was pulling the strings, all while she was the one secretly issuing the orders. On the night of September 16th, 2023, the time authorities believe the family was slain, Palomo put the final phase of her plan into action. Far from staying home, as she later claimed, Palomo was physically present to ensure the deed was done. Surveillance footage and cell phone records later showed that she drove Huey to the victim's house in the early hours of that morning. Huey, armed with a handgun, exited the car and broke into the home, while Palomo waited outside in the vehicle. In a grim scene, Huey proceeded to execute everyone inside. As this slaughter unfolded, Palomo remained in contact with Huey via a two-way radio or phone, acting as both lookout and coach from just outside the crime scene. By the time the sun was rising, 4 members of the Bartolome Roland family had been brutally slain, and the conspirators were already on their way back to their own home in Streamwood. The massacre was carried out exactly as Palomo had instructed, leaving behind a horrific tableau that looked like the work of cold, professional hitmen. This was exactly the impression she wanted to create, and it appeared that Huey was still none the wiser. Once the scale and brutality of the crime became clear, authorities knew they had to act quickly before the perpetrators fled the jurisdiction. But by the time arrest warrants were being prepared, the couple had already vanished. Realizing the authorities were onto them, Huey and Palomo had abruptly left town, prompting a nationwide alert. Police departments across states were notified to be on the lookout, and federal authorities were also kept in the loop as the manhunt intensified. The search for the fugitive couple culminated 2 days later and several states away. On September 20th, 2023, police in Catoosa, Oklahoma, just outside Tulsa, got a hit on Huey's vehicle via a digital license plate recognition system. Officers in Catoosa converged on a Walmart parking lot where the suspect's SUV was spotted sitting empty. Soon, Huey and Palomo returned to the vehicle, apparently unaware that law enforcement was closing in. As the pair started to drive off, police units moved in and attempted a traffic stop. Huey refused to surrender, and a high-speed chase ensued along Interstate 44. The pursuit ended in a crash when Huey's SUV lost control and careened off the highway, crashing and bursting into flames on the roadside. As officers cautiously approached the wrecked and burning vehicle, they suddenly heard 2 gunshots from inside the SUV. When the scene was finally secured, the grim conclusion became apparent. Nathaniel Huey was found dead in the driver's seat, and Ermelinda Palomo was beside him, critically wounded from the accident and gunfire. Palomo was still barely alive and was rushed to a hospital, but she succumbed to her injuries shortly after arriving. In the span of minutes, the 2 fugitives had effectively orchestrated their own violent end. Huey had pumped his fiancée and himself full of lead as police closed in, ensuring they would never be taken into custody alive. With both perpetrators dead, the terrifying spree was over, though it meant that the case would never go to trial. Authorities ultimately concluded that Nathaniel Huey and Ermelinda Palomo were solely responsible for the attacks, and with their deaths, law enforcement officially closed the case. In their final report, investigators noted that Huey died without ever discovering that the cartel bosses who ordered the attacks were all fictitious characters created by Palomo. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here, just reminding you to hit that notification bell and share this video with your friends and family. Also, be sure to check out my podcast, Patreon, my merch store, and my other channels by clicking the links in the description. Anyway, love you all, and thanks for the support always. Now let's get back to business. It was a sunny spring afternoon in Concord, New Hampshire, when a retired couple set out for a routine walk and vanished without a trace. Stephen Reed, 67, and his wife Wendy Reed, 66, were former international humanitarian workers who had spent decades overseas with organizations like the Peace Corps. After returning home to New Hampshire to enjoy a quiet retirement, they settled into a peaceful life near their family. On April 18th, 2022, the Reeds left their apartment for a stroll along the wooded trails near their home. This was a daily ritual that normally brought them joy. This time, however, the couple never returned. Days later, searchers found their bodies just off the Marsh Loop Trail, where they had been dragged into the woods and covered with leaves and sticks. The Reeds had been shot multiple times in broad daylight, an unfathomable crime that sent shockwaves through the quiet community. As days passed with no arrest, fear gripped the town despite police assurances that there was no indication of a continued threat to the public. For months, Concord remained on edge with no suspect identified and a perpetrator still at large. Unbeknownst to everyone, the perp had already fled, and he was no stranger to living on the run. In fact, investigators later learned they had briefly encountered this predator during their search for the missing Reeds. Only at that time they didn't realize that they were face to face with a fugitive drifter. That drifter was 26-year-old Logan Clegg, a man with a troubled past, a stolen gun, and a fake passport. The story of how police unraveled Clegg's identity and brought him to justice is as winding as the woodland trail where the tragedy began. Logan Clegg grew up in a small town in Washington state, but he left behind few traces in his early life, and he never even finished high school. His family life was unstable. His father died when Clegg was 12, and he became estranged from relatives soon after. By his late teens, Clegg was drifting across the country and slipping into a pattern of crime. In 2018, he fatally stabbed a man during a street altercation in Spokane, Washington, but prosecutors declined to charge him, finding that he likely acted in self-defense. 2 years later, while living in Utah, Clegg's behavior escalated further, assuming the stabbing incident was legitimately in self-defense. In the summer of 2020, he was arrested for shoplifting at a Salt Lake City Walmart, where officers discovered a recently stolen handgun in his waistband. Weeks afterward, in August 2020, Clegg was caught fleeing a burglary in Logan, Utah, and police found another stolen firearm along with lock-picking tools in his backpack. He ultimately pleaded guilty to several felonies related to these incidents and served a short jail term before being placed on probation. Instead of rebuilding his life, Clegg chose to run. In June 2021, he violated his probation by leaving the United States and spending 5 months in Europe under the radar. He traveled through countries like Portugal and Germany, living a bohemian lifestyle abroad. By the time he quietly returned to the U.S. in late 2021, Clegg had reinvented himself under false identities and was determined to stay off the grid. In November 2021, Logan Clegg drifted into Concord, New Hampshire, over 2,500 miles from his home state, and began living in a tent in the woods on the outskirts of town. Coincidentally, his campsite was near a residential community called Alton Woods, the very neighborhood where the Reeds lived. Clegg kept a low profile, and he found a job at a local McDonald's, where his supervisor later recalled him as a quiet loner who might have been homeless. At any rate, they were happy to help him out, and he showed up on time and didn't cause a fuss. Indeed, he spent his nights in a flimsy tent among the trees, surviving on camping supplies and food bought with cash and some prepaid cards. Also, keep these prepaid cards in mind, because they were going to be much more traceable than Clegg thought they were. Unknown to anyone, Clegg was also arming himself. In February 2022, using a fake Vermont driver's license under an alias, he purchased a 9mm Glock and ammunition from a gun store and bar in Vermont. Back in Concord, evidence suggests he test-fired the weapon in the woods. Investigators later found trees with bullet damage, as well as 9mm shell casings near his campsite. The drifter in the woods was quietly preparing for reasons only he knew. On April 18, 2022, Stephen and Wendy Reed headed out around 2:15 for one of their regular walks in the broken ground trail system behind their apartment. At roughly the same time, Clegg was walking in those woods as well. Sometime before 3 o'clock, the Reeds crossed paths with the young stranger. A woman walking her dog in the area later reported hearing a sudden burst of gunfire and then seeing a silent, dark-haired man come out of the brush, glancing back in that direction. She didn't know it then, but she had likely witnessed Logan Clegg in the moments after he ambushed the Reeds. In that brief encounter on the trail, Clegg shot Stephen and Wendy multiple times at close range. The attack was unprovoked and shockingly swift. Clegg then dragged the couple's bodies off the path and concealed them under fallen leaves and branches, attempting to hide his horrific deed. With the crime scene obscured, he slipped away through the forest. When the Reeds didn't return home that evening, their family grew worried. By April 20th, relatives had reported Stephen and Wendy as missing. Concord police and volunteers immediately began searching the trails. During the search on April 20th, officers stumbled upon a makeshift campsite hidden in the woods. There they encountered a young man living out of a tent, who identified himself as Arthur Kelly. He claimed he hadn't seen the missing couple and gave no hint of involvement. With nothing overtly incriminating about this camper, the officers moved on. The following day, April 21st, the search effort led to a grim find. The bodies of Stephen and Wendy Reed, covered in brush, only a short distance from where the mysterious camper's tent had been. The missing persons case had now become something so much worse. When detectives returned to question the so-called Arthur Kelly, they found his campsite abandoned. Even more telling, The ground was scorched. The tent and belongings had been deliberately burned and destroyed. The transient who had been living in the woods had vanished overnight and literally torched all the evidence of his stay in the area. Needless to say, the cops had their prime suspect. Investigators now had a description and a false name, but not much else. They dug into local store records for any transactions by Arthur Kelly. Sure enough, they discovered that someone using that name had made numerous purchases at a nearby Walmart. He was often buying camping gear and food with different prepaid cards. By tracing those card numbers, detectives got a break. One of them was linked to an online account under the name Logan Clegg. In September 2022, 5 months after the attacks, police finally put the pieces together and identified the suspect. A mugshot of 26-year-old Logan Clegg from a prior arrest in Utah was retrieved, and it matched the description of the Arthur Kelly seen at the campsite. Concord's McDonald's manager also confirmed that the man in the mugshot was the same quiet employee she knew as Logan, who had quit abruptly in early 2022. The drifter now had a name and a face. Investigators soon realized that Clegg wasn't only their prime suspect, he was also a wanted fugitive from justice. They learned he had been on the run from justice in Utah, where he'd violated probation on burglary and theft charges. Once they knew who they were hunting, authorities accelerated their efforts to track Logan Clegg down. By early October 2022, evidence showed Clegg had left New Hampshire and was on the move. He boarded a bus from Boston to Albany, and then another to Burlington, Vermont. Detectives also discovered Clegg had purchased a one-way plane ticket from New York to Berlin, scheduled to depart on October 14th, 2022. It appeared the drifter was preparing to slip out of the country. In fact, he had already obtained a phony Romanian passport under the alias Claude Zemo as part of this plan. With time running out, Concord police and federal agents coordinated to apprehend Clegg before he could flee abroad. On October 12, 2022, just 2 days before his flight, the authorities turned to Homeland Security to help bring in the bad guy. Bringing their technological wizardry to bear, they found Clegg's burner phone number to trace his cell phone to a wooded area of South Burlington in Vermont. Investigators surveilled a local library where Clegg was spotted and arrested him there without incident that afternoon. In Clegg's backpack, they found the essentials of his life on the run and much more. They found a Glock, nearly $10,000 in cold hard cash money, his genuine U.S. passport, and the fake Romanian passport bearing his photo and alias. He also still had the ticket to Germany. The drifter's escape plan was foiled at the last moment. This bad hombre wouldn't be seeing Deutschland anytime soon. Back in New Hampshire, forensic tests confirmed that shell casings from the scene matched Clegg's handgun, tying him conclusively to the shooting. Confronted with the evidence, Clegg continued to insist he had nothing to do with the attack. Nevertheless, he was extradited to New Hampshire and charged with 2 counts of second-degree slaying in the deaths of Stephen and Wendy Reed. He also faced counts of falsifying evidence for burning his campsite and other actions, and possession of a firearm by a felon. 1 year later, in the fall of 2023, Logan Clegg stood trial for the double slaying. Prosecutors presented the trail of evidence, surveillance videos, the ballistic match, and witness testimony placing Clegg on the trail at the critical time. The motive remained a mystery, and by all accounts, Clegg and the Reeds were strangers, and no clear reason for the attack ever emerged. After a multi-week trial, the jury found Clegg guilty on all charges. In December 2023, a judge sentenced him to 50 years to life in prison, effectively ensuring he wouldn't be drifting out of prison anytime soon. Notably, given Logan Clegg's drifter lifestyle, it's unclear whether he has been connected to any other crimes, either on the home front or abroad. Clegg is known to have slain at least 3 people in his life, and it appears that there's a significant potential that he may be tied to further crimes at some point in the future. On an October morning in 2020, the tight-knit small town of New Boston, Texas, awoke to an unfathomable tragedy. Fair warning, this isn't a case for the faint of heart, and by about halfway through, you may wish we still employed a little bit of medieval justice in disturbing situations like this. That morning, 21-year-old Reagan Simmons Hancock was found brutally slain in her own home. Even more shocking, Reagan's unborn baby had been cut from her womb and was missing from the crime scene. Inside the house, Reagan's first child, a 3-year-old daughter, was found unharmed, left alone amidst the horrific aftermath. This disturbing discovery marked the beginning of a case that would only grow more surreal. The disturbing details of a demented plot emerged. According to those who knew her, Reagan was a young mother full of life and love. She was married to her high school sweetheart, Homer Hancock, and together they were raising their 3-year-old daughter. Reagan was 8 months pregnant with a second daughter they planned to name Braxlyn Sage. She often shared her excitement about the new baby on social media, counting down the days until her November due date. Life for Reagan centered around being a loving wife and mother, and she eagerly anticipated expanding her family. In the shadows of Reagan's happy life lurked a quote-unquote friend with dark intentions. Little did Reagan know this individual wasn't a friend, but rather the worst sort of enemy imaginable. Taylor Renee Parker was a 27-year-old woman from a nearby community who had been acquainted with Reagan. Parker had even photographed Reagan's engagement and wedding, and the two were described as somewhat close by Reagan's husband. On the surface, Parker appeared friendly and supportive, but behind the scenes, she was entangled in a web of lies that would soon turn deadly. Desperate to keep her own romantic relationship from falling apart, Parker concocted an elaborate story that she was pregnant. This was a lie she had maintained for almost 9 months. She convinced everyone around her that she was expecting, posting fake ultrasound images, throwing a cheerful gender reveal party, and sharing constant updates on social media. In reality, there was no baby on the way. Prosecutors later revealed that Parker's motive for this deception was her fear that her boyfriend would leave her if she didn't produce the child she had promised him. As her fictitious due date approached in the fall of 2020, Parker grew increasingly desperate to find a real infant to substantiate her lies. Taylor Parker's scheme wasn't a spontaneous act of violence, but a meticulously plotted crime months in the making. As the date she had claimed as her due date drew near, Parker began searching for a pregnant victim whose baby she could steal. Evidence later showed that she conducted extensive research on how to fake a pregnancy believably, and even how to perform a crude cesarean section on a pregnant woman. Parker watched countless videos about childbirth and newborn care, including medical demonstrations involving premature infants around 35 weeks. Disturbingly, this was the same stage Reagan's pregnancy had reached. Online searches recovered from Parker's devices showed she had also been studying how to stage a convincing home childbirth and avoid detection. On the morning of October 9, 2020, Parker put her deadly plan into motion. She showed up at the Simmons Hancock home under the pretense of a friendly visit, catching Reagan completely off guard. What unfolded inside Reagan's home that morning was every expectant mother's worst nightmare. In fact, it's such an extreme scenario that it's likely beyond the worst-case scenario imagined. Parker attacked Reagan with unimaginable brutality, and I'm going to do you a favor and spare you the details, since this is one of the most disgusting crimes I've ever read about. Parker then used a scalpel to cut open her abdomen and extract the unborn baby girl from her womb. The infant was cruelly wrenched from her dying mother's body, and in a further tragic twist, this traumatic violence ensured that the baby didn't survive the ordeal either. Parker then fled the scene, callously leaving Reagan's 3-year-old alone with her mother on the floor. After the attack, Taylor Parker sped away from New Boston with the newborn in her care, intent on making the infant her own. Within hours, a state trooper in DeKalb, Texas, pulled Parker over for speeding and driving erratically. The officer found Parker with a newborn baby who was unresponsive. Parker hastily claimed she had just given birth on the side of the road and that the baby was not breathing. The trooper immediately called for medical assistance, and Parker and the infant were rushed by ambulance to a hospital in Idabel, Oklahoma, the nearest hospital in the area. At the hospital, Parker's story quickly fell apart. Staff grew suspicious when she flatly refused to be examined by doctors, despite insisting she had just given birth. There were no physical signs of childbirth, and medical personnel alerted law enforcement of a likely crime. Adding to the horror, tragically, baby Braxlin was pronounced deceased soon after arriving at the hospital. Meanwhile, back in New Boston, police responding to the 911 call at the Simmons Hancock residence were confronted with the crime scene. Investigators quickly realized that Reagan's baby had been savagely removed and abducted. When news came through of a woman in Oklahoma with a newborn under suspicious circumstances, authorities from both states rapidly connected the dots. Parker, the same quote-unquote friend who had been with Reagan that very morning, was identified as the prime suspect and arrested at the Oklahoma hospital. Taylor Parker was soon extradited back to Texas to face justice for her unfathomable actions. During a 3-week trial in 2022, prosecutors methodically laid out how Parker's months of deception and planning led to Reagan's brutal death. Evidence showed the lengths of Parker's scheme, from her fake pregnancy charade to the internet searches and videos revealing her intent, leaving the jury little doubt of her guilt. Parker's defense argued that the infant had never been alive outside the womb in an attempt to avoid a kidnapping charge, but medical experts testified the baby had a heartbeat at birth. In his closing arguments, Parker's defense attorney emphasized that his client is, quote, human, and that Parker has, quote, layers. In the legal world, I believe that's what they call throwing in the towel. After only about an hour of deliberation, the jury found Parker guilty. In the penalty phase, Reagan's family gave emotional statements about the pain and loss Parker had caused, and the prosecution not so gently reminded everyone that the crime was a capital offense. Knowing what you know now, I may not surprise you when I tell you what happened next. On October 12, 2022, Taylor Parker was condemned, making her one of only 6 women in the entire state of Texas on death row. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here with a quick reminder to like and subscribe if you appreciate my content. Also remember that you can get my content in audio-only form. Just search Lazy Chill True Crime wherever you get your podcasts. A quiet Jacksonville Beach neighborhood was rattled one night in 2022 by a crime that was both shocking and baffling. Jared Bridegan, a family man and tech executive, was brutally cut down on the street in front of his toddler. For months, the question hung heavy in the air. Who would commit such a heinous act and why? The investigation that followed would slowly peel back layers of deceit, revealing a disturbing plot that allegedly reached back into the victim's own family. Jared was a 33-year-old senior design manager at Microsoft and a devoted father of 4. Born in Missouri and raised in Jacksonville, Florida, He built a successful career in tech with a background in digital media. Beyond his professional accomplishments, Jared was known as a caring family man, always willing to lend a hand. He married his first wife, Shanna Gardner, in 2010, and the couple had twins, but the marriage ended in 2015 amid a bitter split. Their divorce led to a protracted custody battle over the twins, straining relations further. Jared later found love again, marrying his second wife, Kirsten, and together they had 2 young daughters, including a 2-year-old named Bexley. By early 2022, even as he cherished time with his children, Jared was locked in a tense dispute with Shanna over co-parenting. According to allegations by the prosecution, this is a conflict that would soon take on a deadly significance. On the evening of February 16, 2022, Jared Bridegan dropped off his 10-year-old twins at his ex-wife Shanna's home in a quiet Jacksonville Beach neighborhood. This was part of his regular custody arrangement, and everything seemed routine. With his daughter Bexley safely strapped in her car seat, he began the drive back toward his home. It was a routine night until he turned onto the unfortunately named Sanctuary Boulevard, a dark residential road, and saw a tire lying in the road ahead. Being the helpful person he was, Jared stopped his SUV and stepped out to move the obstruction. At that moment, an assailant hiding nearby seized the opportunity. In a sudden burst of violence, Jared was shot multiple times at close range, collapsing in the street. His toddler remained in the vehicle just feet away, unharmed but trapped in a scene of horror as her father lay mortally wounded. Police arrived within minutes to a chilling scene. The 33-year-old victim dead beside a discarded tire, and his 2-year-old daughter still strapped in her car seat. Nothing was stolen, and the child was left alone, signaling to investigators that this was no robbery gone wrong. Jacksonville Beach authorities quickly classified the attack as a planned ambush that was likely part of a deliberate hit, rather than a random act of violence. The carefully placed tire was a clear sign the attack was premeditated. In the weeks following the events of that night, detectives worked to piece together clues from the crime scene and beyond. They collected evidence, canvassed the neighborhood for witnesses, and scoured surveillance footage for leads. A crucial break came from security cameras, which captured a dark blue Ford pickup truck speeding away from the area on the night of the ambush. Jared had no known enemies, which sharpened focus on his domestic life and past relationships. Before long, attention turned to the most turbulent part of Jared's life: his relationship with his ex-wife. Local media highlighted the bitter history between Jared and Shanna, noting their ongoing court battles over custody of the twins. This acrimonious backstory raised suspicion that the ambush could be linked to the family conflict. Shanna herself made some moves that drew scrutiny in the media. She and her second husband, Mario Fernandez Saldana, quickly hired a criminal defense attorney, even though they hadn't been named as suspects or even interviewed yet. Needless to say, this was treated as something of a red flag by the cops, though I have a hard time reading too much into it. After all, regardless if they were completely innocent, they were going to be investigated. They maintained their innocence as rumors swirled. Meanwhile, Jared's widow Kirsten and his family pleaded publicly for justice, keeping the case in the spotlight as months passed with no arrests. Though outwardly the investigation seemed stalled, detectives behind the scenes were steadily building their case, convinced that this carefully orchestrated ambush had roots close to home. Nearly a year after the slaying, when the trail seemed to have gone cold, the case took a dramatic turn. In late January 2023, police announced the arrest of a 61-year-old man named Henry Tenon in connection with Jared Bridegan's slaying. The arrest was a shocking twist. Tenon was neither a relative nor someone in Jared's circle, but investigators believed he was the hidden assailant. Authorities soon revealed that they believed Tenon hadn't acted alone. In fact, he was a former tenant of Mario Fernandez Saldana, Shanna's current husband, linking the stranger directly to Jared's ex-wife's household. Even more telling, according to prosecutors, financial records uncovered by detectives showed that Mario had written several checks to Tenon in the weeks after the attack. According to the prosecution, the pieces of the puzzle were finally falling into place, and they intended to use Tenon to build up their case. Facing serious charges, Henry Tenon agreed to cooperate with prosecutors. In March 2023, he pleaded guilty and admitted to being the triggerman, in exchange for a reduced sentence of 15 years in prison. In his statements, Tenon confirmed that he had been recruited and paid to carry out the hit on Jared, confirming that others were behind the deadly plot. His cooperation provided investigators with alleged insider details that pointed squarely to the individuals who had hired him. According to the prosecution, digital evidence further bolstered the case. GPS data showed that Tenon had driven Jared's route on 2 occasions in the weeks before the attack. Armed with Tenon's testimony and growing stacks of evidence, authorities prepared to move against the alleged masterminds they had suspected all along. In March 2023, just weeks after Tenon's plea, police moved swiftly against 35-year-old Mario Fernandez Saldana. He was arrested in Orlando and indicted on multiple related charges related to the attack. Prosecutors accused Mario of being a key architect of the plot, claiming he arranged the ambush and hiring Tenon to carry it out. Mario pleaded not guilty and was held without bond as the case continued. In August 2023, the final suspect was apprehended. Acting on a secret grand jury indictment, authorities arrested 36-year-old Shanna Gardner. Jared's ex-wife was now formally charged in relation to the conspiracy for her alleged role in masterminding the crime. The news sent shockwaves through the community, even if it confirmed the suspicions that had long surrounded Shanna due to the bitter divorce. Prosecutors publicly alleged that her role in the plot was central to the entire attack. Prosecutors have since announced they'll seek an appointment with the chair for both Shanna Gardner and Mario Fernandez. The two have pleaded not guilty and await a joint trial, which is expected to take place in late 2025. The motive, authorities claim, stemmed from the domestic turmoil and bad blood in the wake of Jared and Shanna's divorce. Whether the prosecution's case holds up in a court of law, of course, still remains to be determined. Shanna Gardner and Mario Fernandez remain innocent until proven guilty in a court of law, and none of the allegations as against them have as yet been proven. January 7th, 2021 started out as an ordinary day for 39-year-old Maya Millett and her family in Chula Vista, California, a quiet suburb of San Diego. Maya was a successful civilian employee of the U.S. Navy and a devoted mother of 3. But by the next morning, Maya was gone without a trace, and a mystery was only beginning. In the hours that followed, her loved ones could tell something was terribly wrong. She was last seen at her home on the evening of January 7th, 2021, just one day before she and her husband Larry were supposed to take their kids on a weekend trip. 2 days after Maya went missing, her sister reported her disappearance to Chula Vista Police on January 9th, 2021. Immediately, family, friends, and neighbors frantically mobilized, printing flyers, knocking on doors, and venturing into parks and canyons in hopes of finding any trace of Maya. Volunteers even scoured remote desert areas east of the city, refusing to give up on the search. As days passed with no sign of her, concern turned to dread. Maya's husband, Larry, told relatives inconsistent stories about where she might have gone, raising red flags from the start. Within 2 weeks, police executed the first search warrant at the Millett home, seizing several of Larry's weapons as they looked for clues in Maya's disappearance. Notably, Larry made little effort to help in the search for his wife, a fact that didn't go unnoticed. As police continued to search for Maya, a portrait of the Millett's troubled marriage began to emerge. Maya had been planning to divorce Larry by the end of 2020 after years of growing tension. Larry had become increasingly controlling and was infuriated by Maya's decision to leave, especially since he suspected she was seeing someone else. Friends later revealed Maya had expressed fear for her safety. One friend even offered her a safe place to stay if things got worse. In fact, Maya had contacted a divorce lawyer on the very day she disappeared, a sign that she was finally ready to end the marriage. Chillingly, in the months prior, Maya had told her family that if anything happens to her, look to Larry. Not long after Maya was reported missing, Larry hired an attorney and stopped cooperating with investigators. As the months dragged on with no sign of Maya, the missing person case was increasingly treated as a criminal investigation. The deeper authorities looked, the stranger the story became. Detectives discovered that Larry had been contacting online spellcasters in the months before Maya vanished, seeking mystical help to stop his wife from leaving. Early on, he requested love spells to keep Maya tied to him. But by late December 2020, his tone had turned menacing. He was pleading for these e-wizards to harm Maya, to incapacitate her, or make her have an accident, so she couldn't escape him. Larry's dabbling in the occult allegedly went as far as assembling a darkly bizarre altar, with a photo of the couple reportedly splattered with drops of blood and surrounded by candles. Investigators also learned he had allegedly inquired about hiring someone to knock off the man he believed Maya was seeing, revealing just how dangerous and unhinged he'd become. Clues from the night of January 7th pointed to a violent event having taken place. Earlier that evening, around 8:15 p.m., Maya sent her family a final cheerful message over Facebook Messenger, the last time anyone heard from her. That same afternoon, Larry had texted someone that he was, quote, ready to snap, an ominous sign of his mindset as tensions in the household reached a breaking point. A neighbor's security camera later recorded a series of loud bangs just before 10 p.m., echoing from the Millett house. About half an hour later, the voices of the Millett children were heard outside in the backyard on that cool night, a highly unusual sight for such a late hour. The next morning, January 8th, Larry was seen backing the family's Lexus SUV into the garage with its rear hatch facing indoors, as if to conceal something being loaded. He then left home around 6:45 a.m., leaving his cell phone behind so it couldn't be tracked, and was gone for roughly 11 hours. By the fall of 2021, investigators had executed dozens of warrants and interviews, and they finally felt confident enough in the case to act. On October 19, 2021, a SWAT team swarmed the Millett residence in a dramatic raid and arrested Larry. Larry pleaded not guilty at his arraignment and continues to insist that Maya simply left on her own. Investigators and Maya's relatives flatly reject that claim. In court, a judge ordered Larry to be held without bail, citing the potential danger he posed to the public. In 2022, his defense attorney asked the court to deem his client not competent to stand trial by reason of mental illness. After examinations by psychiatrists, this was rejected, and Larry was found to be competent to stand trial. This is where the case stands today. Maya's body has never been recovered, which will necessarily be an extra hurdle for the prosecution going forward. The trial has subsequently been pushed back several times and is now scheduled to proceed in January 2026. Larry Millett remains innocent until proven guilty in a court of law, and none of the allegations as against him have as yet been proven. On a quiet June morning in 2020, FBI agents and local police dug in the backyard of a rural Idaho property. What they uncovered turned the homestead into a horrific crime scene. The buried remains of two children, 7-year-old J.J. Vallow and 16-year-old Tylee Ryan. Authorities had been searching for these siblings for months, amid fears that their mother, Lori Vallow, and her new husband, Chad Daybell, were hiding a terrible secret. Vallow and Daybell weren't just an ordinary couple. They were deranged doomsday cultists with 7 marriages between them. Over the coming years, investigators from Idaho, Arizona, and beyond would unravel a tangled web of suspicious deaths and cover-ups. This shocking discovery was the tragic culmination of a mystery that began with 2 missing children and spiraled into one of the most bizarre crime stories in recent memory. Lori Vallow was once seen as a loving mother and a devout member of her church. She had 2 children, Tylee and JJ, and for years lived a seemingly ordinary life. Chad Daybell was a fringe religious author and father of 5 who claimed to have special spiritual visions of the apocalypse. He self-published doomsday-themed novels and preached that the end of the world was imminent, even predicting it would happen in July 2020. Both Lori and Chad were affiliated with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, commonly known as Mormons, but their beliefs had strayed far from Mormon orthodoxy by the time they met. In October 2018, Lori and Chad met in person at a religious conference in Utah, and that encounter marked the beginning of their dangerous obsession. In fact, an audio recording later surfaced of Lori speaking at a religious meeting in October 2018, where she joked that she had been tempted to snuff out her 3rd husband, Joseph Ryan. Whether this was simple dark humor or something much worse, it turned into an eerie foreshadowing of what was to come. After meeting Chad, Lori's outlook changed dramatically. She became enthralled by Chad's bizarre teachings and claims of special powers. Chad captivated her with stories of his near-death visions and supposed past lives, and Lori began to believe she was a divine warrior chosen to help usher in Christ's second coming. In early 2019, Lori's then-husband, Charles Vallow, grew alarmed. He told police that Lori had threatened to bump him off, and that she believed she was a god preparing for Christ's second coming, and that anyone in her way would be eliminated. Charles filed for divorce and warned authorities about Lori's behavior. Then, on July 11, 2019, Charles Vallow was shot dead by Lori's brother, Alex Cox, at Lori's Arizona home. Alex claimed he fired in self-defense after Charles allegedly hit him with a baseball bat. Police initially believed the story, since Lori and Tylee supported Alex's account. Lori herself was strangely calm when officers arrived. However, red flags emerged. Alex waited 43 minutes to call 911 and didn't attempt CPR on his dying brother-in-law. And just a week after Charles's death, Lori texted Chad in frustration upon learning that Charles had removed her as the beneficiary of his $1 million life insurance policy. This suggested a possible financial motive layered on top of Lori's extreme new beliefs. By September 2019, Lori had quietly relocated with Tylee and JJ to Rexburg, Idaho, which, unsurprisingly, was the area where Chad Daybell lived. Her brother Alex moved too, renting an apartment nearby. It seemed Lori was gathering her close circle in what they viewed as a prophesied refuge. Lori and Chad even referred to their little sect as the Church of the Firstborn, believing they had a divine mission to lead the 144,000 chosen before the end times. They classified people as light or dark spirits, and said some individuals became zombies. This meant a person whose mortal soul had been pushed out, and whose body was taken over by an evil spirit. In their doctrine, the only way to save someone's soul from a zombie was to eliminate that person to release them from quote-unquote demonic captivity. Disturbingly, Lori began insisting that her 2 children were among those who had become possessed by dark spirits, according to later testimony from her friend Melanie Gibb. Chillingly, text messages between Lori and Chad in 2019 showed them referring to Tylee and JJ as demons and talking about being tired of dealing with these supposed obstacles. At the time they vanished, Tylee was 16 and JJ was 7. Tylee was Lori's daughter from a previous marriage. JJ was her adopted son and the biological grandson of Lori's former sister-in-law, Kay Woodcock. Both of these children had of course been an integral part of the family's life, and their sudden absence in September 2019 raised immediate red flags among relatives. 16-year-old Tylee Ryan was last seen on September 8, 2019, during a day trip to Yellowstone National Park with Lori, Alex, and JJ. After that outing, Tylee was never seen again. About 2 weeks later, 7-year-old JJ Vallow was seen alive for the final time on the night of September 22, 2019. Family friend Melanie Gibb was visiting Lori that weekend, and she later told police that she saw Alex Cox carry a sleeping JJ into Lori's apartment on the night of September 22nd. By the next morning, JJ was gone, and Lori gave Melanie a bizarre explanation. She claimed JJ had become a zombie, and that Alex had to take him away. That same day, Lori called JJ's school to withdraw him, falsely claiming she would now homeschool her son. In reality, JJ was already gone like his sister. Investigators would later use cell phone records to piece together what likely happened to the children. Data from Alex Cox's phone placed him at Lori's apartment in the pre-dawn hours of September 9th, 2019, just after Tylee was last seen. Then he was placed in Chad Daybell's backyard for roughly 2 hours that morning. Later that day, Chad sent his wife Tammy a strange text message about having smoked a raccoon and burying it in their pet cemetery. Police found this story suspicious, suspecting it was a cover to explain a fresh grave on the property. Similarly, on the morning of September 23rd, the day after JJ vanished, Alex's phone pinged in Chad's yard again. Those phone pings corresponded closely to the spots where Tylee and JJ's remains would eventually be found buried 9 months later. While the children were being quietly eliminated due to the delusional cultist mental framework, other violent incidents pointed to Lori and Chad's widening circle of targets. On October 2nd, 2019, Lori's niece's ex-husband, Brandon Boudreau, was shot at in a drive-by outside his Arizona home, but thankfully survived. The Jeep used in the attempt belonged to Charles Vallow, implicating Alex Cox as the likely triggerman. Then, on October 9th, 2019, Tammy Daybell, Chad's then-wife, called 911 after a masked man attempted to blast her with what she thought was a paintball gun. She was frightened, but ultimately she wasn't harmed. While there's no proof of this, it's been speculated that this was no paintball pea shooter, but rather a genuine piece of iron potentially wielded by Alex Cox. 10 days later, on October 19th, Tammy died suddenly in her sleep at age 49. Her death was initially recorded as being from natural causes, and no autopsy was performed. In fact, as investigators later found, Tammy had been asphyxiated. The doomsday cultists had struck again, removing another obstacle in their way. With Tammy gone, Chad and Lori had few obstacles left. On November 5th, 2019, less than 3 weeks after Tammy's funeral, Chad and Lori quietly wed in Hawaii. They posed for wedding photos on a Kauai beach with flower leis and broad smiles, while Lori's children were nowhere to be seen. Chad told neighbors that Lori had no minor kids, and Lori herself pretended that her daughter Tylee had died years earlier to explain Tylee's absence. By late November 2019, JJ's grandparents Larry and Kay Woodcock were frantic with worry, having been unable to contact the children for months. They alerted authorities in Idaho, and on November 26, 2019, the Rexburg cops knocked on Lori's door to conduct a welfare check on JJ at the grandparents' request. Lori casually lied to the officers, claiming JJ was in Arizona with family friend Melanie Gibb. When police reached out, Gibb advised that JJ wasn't with her at all, but provided no further information. The very next day, November 27th, officers arrived with a search warrant, only to discover that Chad and Lori had fled Idaho during the night. In the following days, investigators learned that on December 1st, 2019, Chad and Lori caught a flight to Hawaii. While police in Idaho and Arizona were frantically searching for the missing kids, the newlywed couple spent that December in Kauai, walking on the beach and refusing to cooperate. On December 11th, 2019, Tammy Daybell's body was exhumed for autopsy in Utah, as detectives now strongly suspected her death was intentional. The very next day, December 12th, Lori's brother, Alex Cox, suddenly collapsed and died of a pulmonary embolism in Arizona. The circumstances of his death still aren't officially understood, as he was found with substances in his system. His unexpected death meant one less conspirator available to answer for the crimes. On December 20th, 2019, police in Rexburg officially announced to the public that Tylee Ryan and JJ Vallow were missing under suspicious circumstances. They formally named Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell as persons of interest. The case made national headlines. As bizarre details of Lori's beliefs emerged, the media soon nicknamed her the Cult Mom. Through an attorney, Chad and Lori issued a statement around Christmas, denying any wrongdoing and insisting they were loving, devoted parents. Law enforcement, meanwhile, pointed out that the couple's lack of cooperation was astonishing, emphasizing that Lori clearly knew what happened to her kids and was refusing to help. As 2020 began, the FBI joined the investigation, and multiple agencies coordinated to find the children. On January 3rd, investigators executed a search warrant at Chad Daybell's home, seizing computers, cell phones, and journals for any clues. In early January 2020, even Chad's own brother publicly pleaded for him to cooperate with the investigation, saying Chad's family was deeply worried by his extreme claims. The pressure on Lori to produce her children intensified. On January 25, 2020, authorities in Kauai served Lori with a court order from Idaho, demanding she produce Tylee and JJ within 5 days. Unsurprisingly, she didn't comply, and when Lori failed to meet the court deadline, Idaho authorities obtained a warrant for her arrest. On February 20, 2020, Lori Vallow was taken into custody by police in Kauai. She was charged with 2 felony counts of desertion and non-support of dependent children, as well as resisting and contempt of court for ignoring the order to produce the kids. Chad continued to remain a free man for the time being, but I'm gonna let you in on a secret here. This deranged prophet of doom was about to go down hard. Through spring 2020, investigators continued to build their case. Lori's friend Melanie Gibb provided critical information, admitting that Lori and Chad had asked her to tell them JJ was with her in November 2019. Gibb also confirmed the couple's talk of zombies and evil spirits, which helped authorities understand the suspect's twisted mindset. All the evidence pointed police back to Chad's property for a closer look. Further evidence of Lori's deceit came to light in early 2020 when investigators discovered that she had abandoned a storage unit in Rexburg, containing her children's belongings. On June 9, 2020, officers returned to Chad Daybell's home with a new search warrant. Chad watched from his driveway as investigators methodically combed through the yard with shovels and probes. In a patch of dirt beneath a tree, they found what looked like a buried bundle wrapped in plastic. Tragically, it turned out to be the remains of 7-year-old J.J. Vallow, still in his red pajamas and bound with duct tape. A short distance away, in the Daybell Pet Cemetery, another site revealed the remains of 16-year-old Tylee Ryan. The heartbreaking discovery confirmed that the children had been slain and clandestinely buried on Chad's land. As soon as investigators uncovered the first human remains, Chad jumped into his car and tried to flee, but officers quickly pulled him over and arrested him a short distance from his home. He was charged with destruction and concealment of evidence for the gruesome burial of the children. In the meantime, police began to work on building evidence for further charges. In May 2021, a grand jury in Idaho indicted Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell on charges related to the deaths of Tylee, JJ, and Tammy Daybell. Prosecutors alleged that the couple, together with Alex Cox, had orchestrated these slayings as part of their apocalyptic religious beliefs, while also seeking to financially profit from the deaths. They noted, for example, that Lori continued to collect Social Security benefits on behalf of the children, even after the children were dead. Chad had quickly obtained life insurance money after Tammy's death. Despite the overwhelming nature of the evidence against them, both Lori and Chad pleaded not guilty to the charges. Around the same time, Arizona authorities brought their own indictments. A grand jury in Arizona charged Lori with conspiring in the slaying of her ex-husband Charles Vallow, with Alex Cox as her co-conspirator. She was also charged in Arizona with conspiring to eliminate Brandon Boudreaux. The full scope of the saga was now laid bare. A string of alleged and attempted slayings spanning 2 states, all tracing back to Lori and Chad's so-called doomsday mission. In mid-2021, the Idaho case paused when Lori was declared incompetent to stand trial and was committed to a psychiatric facility for treatment. After about 10 months of observation and treatment, she declared competent to stand trial by April 2022, and proceedings resumed. Prosecutors initially intended to seek the death penalty against both defendants, given the heinous nature of the crimes. The court also decided to move the coming trial out of the small local community to Boise to ensure an impartial jury due to overwhelming publicity. As trial dates approached, a judge ruled in March 2023 to sever Lori's case from Chad's, scheduling Lori's trial first for April 2023. The judge also removed the death penalty as an option in Lori's trial, mainly because of concerns over timely disclosure of evidence. Chad's trial, still set for 2024, retained the possibility of a trip to the chair. Lori Vallow's trial began in April 2023 in Boise. Prosecutors outlined how she and Chad had transformed their fringe theology into a motive for the slayings, while also scheming to benefit from the deaths. Witnesses described Lori's claims that Tylee and JJ were zombies in the weeks before they disappeared. Lori's defense claimed that she was a loving mother, led astray by Chad's influence, but they had little evidence to counter the overwhelming proof of her involvement. After a 6-week trial, the jury needed only a short deliberation to find Lori Vallow Daybell guilty on May 12, 2023. She was found guilty of the slayings of the kids, as well as conspiracy in the Tammy Daybell case. She was convicted on all counts: the slayings of Tylee and JJ, conspiracy in Tammy Daybell's case, and grand theft for continuing to collect the children's benefits. In July 2023, Lori was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole, with the multiple life terms to be served one after the other. She was later extradited to Arizona to stand trial for the slaying of Charles Vallow and the attempt on Brandon Boudreau, being found guilty on both accounts. Chad Daybell's trial commenced in April 2024 in Boise. Much of the same damning evidence was presented, with added focus on Tammy Daybell's death and Chad's role as the mastermind of the conspiracy. On June 1st, 2024, the jury unanimously recommended calling down a very localized apocalypse on Chad Daybell in particular, given the heinous, premeditated nature of the crimes. The judge imposed a trip to the chair, making Chad one of the few inmates on Idaho's death row. He was transferred to state prison to await execution, although the appeals process will delay any final resolution for decades. The saga of Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell is a chilling cautionary tale of how apocalyptic obsession, fringe religious beliefs, and unchecked greed can erupt into real-world violence. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy, just giving a huge thank you to everyone who views, subscribes, and supports my channel. Seriously, I couldn't do this without you. You're all the best, and I'm so grateful to have you here. Also remember to check out my podcast, Lazy Chill True Crime, and my merch store by clicking the links below. Anyway, with all that said, no more interruptions. Let's get back to business. Gannon Stauch was an 11-year-old boy living with his father Albert and stepmother Letitia in a suburb of Colorado Springs. His parents were divorced, and while his mother Landon lived in South Carolina, Gannon and his younger sister Lena stayed with their dad and Letitia. Those who knew Gannon described him as a kind, shy fifth grader who loved video games and riding his bicycle around the neighborhood. In January 2020, the family's life seemed typical until the day Gannon went missing. On Monday, January 27, 2020, Gannon stayed home from school under Letitia's care, reportedly because he wasn't feeling well. That evening, shortly before 7, Letitia called 911 to report that Gannon hadn't returned home. She claimed the boy had left on foot around 3:15 to go play at a friend's house in the neighborhood and never came back. The El Paso County Sheriff's Office responded and initially treated the case as a runaway situation, a common assumption often made when a slightly older child is missing. Deputies did a brief search of the area that night, but found no trace of Gannon. In the following days, as Gannon remained missing, law enforcement escalated their response. By January 30th, authorities reclassified his case as a missing and endangered child, indicating concern that this was no runaway case as initially speculated. They brought in additional resources, including the FBI. A massive search was launched with law enforcement and volunteers combing the area by land and air. Winter weather added to the challenge, as snow and frigid temperatures made the search even more difficult. As expected, the community rallied around the family. Neighbors volunteered to help search. Gannon's father, Al, rushed back from his National Guard duty, and his mother, Landon, flew in from South Carolina to join the search. Both parents made tearful public pleas for any information that could lead to their son, begging the public to help bring Gannon home safely. Despite the outpouring of support and extensive search efforts, no significant leads turned up in that first week. Gannon's disappearance quickly grabbed national attention, putting intense pressure on law enforcement to find answers. By mid-February, over 500 tips had poured into the sheriff's office, yet still nothing concrete was found. While the public searched desperately, investigators began picking up on inconsistencies in Letitia's account. The first major red flag came from a neighbor's surveillance camera. Also, just as a quick aside, I'm not sure how the surveillance camera wasn't immediately noticed by investigators, given that it had coverage of the material areas at the relevant times. One neighbor reviewed his security camera footage from that Monday and was startled by what he found. The video showed Letitia and Gannon leaving the home together in Al's red Nissan Frontier around 10:15 on the morning of January 27th. Then the footage showed the truck returning about 4 hours later, and notably, Letitia was alone, or at least Gannon was not visible with her. This directly contradicted Letitia's story that Gannon had been at home all day and left on foot in the afternoon. It was now apparent that the last person to see Gannon alive was not a neighbor or friend, but Letitia herself during that truck ride. As the investigation continued, Letitia's behavior did little to allay suspicions. She spoke to local media in the days after Gannon vanished, at one point giving an interview to defend herself. In that interview, Letitia insisted she would never hurt her stepson and complained about being treated as a suspect by the public. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, her story was evolving in bizarre ways. On January 29th, just 2 days after the disappearance, Letitia told detectives an elaborate new tale. She claimed that on the day Gannon went missing, a man had conducted an indecent assault against her in the home and then abducted Gannon. She even provided a name for this supposed assailant, Eduardo, saying he was a tradesman who had come to do some work on some wall-to-wall carpeting. This shocking allegation was completely at odds with what she had initially reported. Investigators found no evidence of any intruder or assault, and believed Letitia's story was fabricated. In fact, over the next couple of weeks, Letitia offered multiple conflicting versions of events to different people. These shifting stories only heightened law enforcement's suspicions that Letitia knew far more about Gannon's disappearance than she was admitting. At one point, Gannon's father, Al, even asked his wife directly, in a recorded call arranged by investigators, if she had hurt Gannon. Letitia didn't confess. Instead, she spun another excuse, which only made Al and the police more certain of her involvement. By early February 2020, investigators were quietly treating Gannon's case as a likely slaying, even though officially he was still listed as missing. They began to amass a collection of forensic and digital evidence pointing to foul play. A pivotal discovery was made when they searched Gannon's bedroom with specialized tools. They discovered Gannon's blood on the walls and even soaked through the carpet to the concrete floor, despite an apparent attempt to clean it up. Investigators also discovered that on the night of January 27th, Letitia sent her teenage daughter to buy carpet deodorizer, trash bags, and baking soda. These are cleaning items consistent with trying to cover up a crime. This grim finding made it clear a serious violent event had occurred in his bedroom. Additionally, examination of the family's vehicles provided more clues. Letitia's Volkswagen tested positive for Gannon's blood. Alongside the physical evidence, detectives dug into cell phone records, text messages, and surveillance footage from around town to piece together Letitia's movements. They learned that on January 27th, Letitia had deliberately left her own cell phone at home, making it difficult to track her, and used Gannon's phone while they were out. Around 11 a.m. that day, she was captured on a security camera at a Petco store buying pet supplies. Notably, Gannon wasn't with her on that footage. She briefly returned home, then went back out to the same store a little after 1 p.m. for another purchase. These errand runs seemed oddly timed to investigators. They left a gap of time during which investigators suspect Letitia may have harmed Gannon and disposed of evidence. In fact, cell tower data and later investigations suggested that around noon, she drove to a rural area north of Colorado Springs. This is the very area that would later become a location of a key finding related to the case. On top of that, investigators learned that the very next day, January 28th, Letitia made another suspicious move. That morning, she rented a car and left her SUV at a Colorado Springs airport parking lot. Later that night, after her husband returned home from his trip, she retrieved the Volkswagen from the airport. Investigators also found extremely incriminating activity on Letitia's devices. In the days after Gannon vanished, she searched for jobs and apartments in other states, as if planning to leave town. Even more telling, she began to research how to trick polygraph tests. Such actions strongly suggested she knew she was guilty and was trying to cover her tracks. A break in the case came when investigators tracked one of Letitia's suspected routes. Around February 15th, searchers in Douglas County, about an hour north of Colorado Springs, found a piece of particle board off the side of a road that had blood on it. Testing confirmed the blood matched Gannon's DNA. This discovery indicated that Letitia had disposed of some evidence, possibly Gannon's body or items related to the crime, in that area. With this critical evidence and everything else they had compiled, authorities decided they could wait no longer. Letitia, for her part, had since fled to Myrtle Beach in South Carolina. On March 2nd, 2020, the El Paso County Sheriff's Office announced the arrest of Letitia Stauch in Myrtle Beach. Even though Gannon's body had not yet been found at that time, the evidence of foul play was strong enough for prosecutors to charge her with Gannon's slaying. She was soon extradited back to Colorado to face a litany of charges related to Gannon's death. By this stage of the investigation, authorities had executed well over 100 search warrants. Not long after her arrest, while being transported back to Colorado, Letitia attempted to escape custody by attacking a deputy during a transport stop. She was quickly subdued, but the incident served to show her extreme desperation as the walls closed in on her. 2 weeks later, the case reached a heartbreaking conclusion. On March 17, 2020, workers doing maintenance under a bridge over Escambia Bay in Pace, Florida, discovered a suitcase in the water. Inside the suitcase was the most disturbing discovery imaginable: Gannon's body. This location was more than 1,000 miles from Colorado. The autopsy report sadly confirmed that Gannon had died a brutal death at the hands of this woman who was supposed to care for him. Investigators concluded that after slaying Gannon, Letitia initially hid his body in Colorado, but later retrieved the remains and drove cross-country for a further dumping effort. She likely detoured through the Florida Panhandle while traveling east, casting the suitcase off a bridge in hopes it would never be found. With Gannon's remains recovered, prosecutors gained the final piece of evidence tying the crime to Letitia. They promptly filed additional charges against her, reflecting the premeditated and violent nature of the brutal attack. 3 years later, in spring 2023, Letitia finally went on trial. She pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, but prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence of her planning and cover-up. After weeks of testimony, the jury rejected her insanity claim and found her guilty. In the end, a judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole, a fate that's ultimately way too good for this sick monster. In the sweltering summer of 2011, a local news interview in Macon, Georgia took a chilling turn. A young law school graduate named Stephen McDaniel stood in front of the camera, claiming to be concerned about his missing neighbor and classmate, 27-year-old Lauren Giddings. His voice trembled as he speculated about her whereabouts, until a reporter broke the news that a body had just been found. McDaniel's face went slack with shock. He stumbled over his words, eyes darting, as if caught off guard by the gruesome discovery. He literally muttered, "I think I need to sit down," and walked away from the camera. That unsettling on-air moment would soon go viral and become a key turning point in the investigation. Little did viewers know, they were witnessing a perpetrator's facade beginning to crack. Originally from Maryland, Lauren was the eldest of three sisters and had moved to Macon to attend Mercer University's law school. By June 2011, she had just graduated law school and aspired to become a public defender, driven by big dreams of a career in justice. She believed that she could make a difference in the lives of people who were accused of offenses and couldn't afford their own representation. In short, Lauren Giddings was selfless, accomplished, and on the cusp of starting her professional life when she suddenly vanished in late June 2011. On Friday, June 24th, 2011, just weeks after graduation, Lauren joined friends for a night out on the town. This was a final celebration before everyone buckled down to study for the upcoming bar exam. The fun carried into the early hours of Saturday. Lauren spent that night at a friend's apartment and was seen the next day relaxing by a country club pool. A transaction on her bank card later that Saturday placed her at a local restaurant around 6 p.m., which would be the last known activity on her accounts. After Saturday, Lauren seemingly dropped off the grid. When texts and calls to her phone went unanswered for days, her family and friends knew something was wrong. Lauren was independent, but it wasn't like her to go out of contact. By Wednesday, June 29th, worry had turned to dread. Unable to reach her, Lauren's sister asked a friend to check on her. Lauren's close friend Ashley Muller, along with Muller's boyfriend, used a spare key to enter Lauren's apartment. Inside, nothing looked obviously amiss at first. There were no signs of forced entry or a struggle. But ominously, Lauren herself was nowhere to be found. Her purse, keys, cell phone, and identification were all still in the apartment, as if she had just stepped out briefly. Even her laptop was there, open as if she had been in the middle of something. The only thing missing wasn't a thing at all, but Lauren, and that alarming discovery prompted her friends to call the police. Macon police arrived and began a missing person investigation. A preliminary check of Lauren's computer revealed a haunting clue. On Saturday night, June 25th, Lauren had emailed her boyfriend that someone tried to break into her apartment the night before. It suggested that Lauren had sensed a threat very close to home, and whatever fear she had was now compounded by her sudden disappearance. The very next morning, on Thursday, June 30th, police investigator Steve Gatlin returned to Lauren's apartment complex to search for more clues. As he stepped outside, a foul odor hit him. The distinct, sickening smell of rot carried on the summer breeze. Gatlin followed the scent to a green trash bin only a few steps from Lauren's building. Peering inside, he saw 2 garbage bags. Inside one of them, wrapped in plastic, were human remains. It was Lauren Giddings' torso, the only portion of her body that would ever be recovered. The rest of her remains, police later learned, had been discarded in dumpsters around town and would never be found. The discovery was as gruesome as it was heartbreaking. Detectives immediately sealed off the area and treated Lauren's apartment as a crime scene. A forensic search with luminol, a chemical that reveals blood traces, illuminated the bathroom in an eerie blue glow, indicating that someone had tried to clean up a horrific crime. The bathtub, in particular, glowed nearly from bottom to top, telling investigators that it had been used to dismember a body. The grim evidence made it clear that Lauren had been slain and chopped apart right there in her own apartment, likely by someone who had gained access to her home. 2 men immediately on detectives' radar were the men Lauren had recently dated. One was her current boyfriend, an older attorney named David, who lived in Atlanta. The other was her ex-boyfriend Joe, a fellow Mercer Law graduate in Macon. Both men had seen Lauren shortly before she disappeared. David was quickly ruled out. He had been across the country in California on the weekend Lauren was slain, a fact backed up by flight records and his own statements to investigators. Joe, the ex-boyfriend, was also cooperative and couldn't be tied to the crime in any way. The focus then shifted to Lauren's immediate surroundings. Her apartment complex and anyone who lived nearby immediately came into question. Lauren's neighborhood was populated largely by fellow students and recent graduates, a typically quiet community when it comes to criminality. Investigators soon learned that one of Lauren's neighbors was a former classmate of hers, 25-year-old Stephen Mark, who lived right next door. McDaniel and Lauren had known each other for years. They graduated in the same law class and had even been members of the same student organization on campus. To all appearances, McDaniel was an unremarkable, even shy young man who, like Lauren, was studying for the bar exam that summer. He was interviewed on June 30th along with other neighbors, and nothing immediately incriminating emerged, at least not until his strange television appearance later that day. That afternoon, as investigators continued their work at the scene, Stephen McDaniel spoke with local news reporters about Lauren's disappearance. He presented himself as a worried friend, telling reporters that everyone was looking for Lauren and hoping for her safe return. Then came the bombshell announcement during the interview that a body, the torso, had been found near the apartments. Cameras captured McDaniel's demeanor shifting dramatically. He went from talkative to visibly rattled, even panicked, when he realized Lauren's remains had been discovered. Detective Gatlin, observing this, found McDaniel's reaction very odd, noting how the neighbor suddenly seemed to stare off into space upon hearing the news. At the time, McDaniel's shock could have been interpreted as the natural horror of a neighbor learning his friend was deceased. In light of Stephen McDaniel's bizarre on-camera reaction, investigators decided to take a closer look at him. They invited McDaniel down to the police station that same day for a more in-depth interview. What started as a witness statement soon turned into a grueling 12-hour interrogation that stretched overnight into July 1st. Interestingly enough, despite having graduated from law school just weeks prior, he didn't ask for an attorney. Considering he did it, I suppose we should all be thankful that he didn't take his legal education to heart. McDaniel initially stuck to a story that he knew nothing of Lauren's whereabouts. He even consented to police searching his apartment, maintaining an air of anxious cooperation. However, officers were already uncovering evidence that would contradict McDaniel's claims of innocence. Back at the apartment building, a sweep of the shared laundry room yielded a critical piece of evidence. Inside an adjacent maintenance closet, investigators found a hacksaw tucked away on a shelf. Crucially, the saw's blade appeared to have traces of blood at both ends, as if someone had attempted to wipe it clean, but hadn't done a thorough job. Forensic testing later confirmed it was Lauren's blood on the hacksaw, and its blade matched the wounds on her recovered remains. Finding a bloodied hacksaw, the very tool likely used in the dismemberment, was a major break in the case. It also meant that whoever did this to Lauren had used the building's facilities to hide or dispose of evidence. The maintenance area was normally locked, suggesting the perpetrator had inside knowledge or access. They investigated anyone associated with the building's management, but this yielded no meaningful leads. There was no obsessive maintenance worker or handyman, and no landlord who had exhibited weird behavior towards tenants. Simply put, everyone who should have had access to these areas was clean as a whistle. Investigators next turned their attention back to Stephen McDaniel. They learned that McDaniel had previously volunteered for a neighborhood watch and was known to have a bit of a locksmithing hobby. For those unaware, the key skills of a locksmith are being able to pick locks as well as create keys. Sure enough, when police searched McDaniel's small apartment, they uncovered two suspicious keys. One was a master key that could open the maintenance closets on the property, like the one where the hacksaw was found. The other was a hand-cut key designed to fit Lauren's apartment door. This meant McDaniel could have let himself into Lauren's home without forcing entry. Exactly what Lauren's eerie last email had feared. Making matters worse, McDaniel had been sneaking into Lauren's apartment and stealing her clothing, including her underwear. As the hours ticked by in the interrogation room, detectives pressed McDaniel on these findings. They ended up taking him into custody for burglary, as the cops had a chance to sweep his apartment and his dark personal life more thoroughly. They talked to McDaniel's former roommate, who revealed a disturbing insight. Stephen McDaniel had often fantasized aloud about how to commit the perfect slaying and get away with it. The roommate recounted how McDaniel would obsess over gruesome scenarios. Meanwhile, forensic teams combed through McDaniel's electronic devices. What they found further cemented the case. McDaniel's computer contained some of the most dark and disturbing content possible. What was clear is that he had been dwelling on extremely dark fantasies. Most damning of all, investigators recovered a video file that McDaniel had made himself. The grainy footage showed the outside of Lauren's apartment window at night, filmed by McDaniel as he spied on Lauren just a day or two before she went missing. The angle suggested he had rigged a camera on a long stick to peek into her second-story window. In that moment, all the pieces clicked together. This was the attempted break-in Lauren thought she sensed. He had been stalking her, and the crime was premeditated. On August 2nd, 2011, a little over a month after Lauren's body was found, Stephen McDaniel was formally charged with her slaying. For nearly 3 years, Stephen McDaniel awaited trial behind bars as prosecutors methodically prepared their case. Then, in April 2014, in a dramatic turn, McDaniel struck a plea deal to avoid a possible trip to the chair. Stephen McDaniel was sentenced to life in prison for the slaying of Lauren. Under the terms of the plea, he will have a chance at parole, but not until 2041, after he serves 30 years behind bars at minimum. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here, just saying a big thank you for coming out and watching my content. Also remember to check out my podcast, Lazy Chill True Crime, by clicking the link in the description or by searching it up. The podcast has content from 2 of my channels, plus bonus content you won't see or hear anywhere else. On a brisk Saturday morning in March 2011, a store manager arrived to open the Lululemon shop in Bethesda, an upscale Maryland suburb, expecting a routine day. Instead, she found the door unlocked, and the boutique turned into a blood-soaked crime scene. The shop was in shambles. Merchandise and mannequins were strewn across the floor, and in a back hallway lay 30-year-old Jana Murray, face down in a pool of blood. A ligature was still wrapped around her neck, clear evidence of the violence that had occurred. Another employee, 28-year-old Brittany Norwood, was discovered alive in a restroom, bound with zip ties and moaning in pain. This horrific scene would soon reveal one of the most disturbing twists possible. When police arrived, Brittany Norwood spun a terrifying tale of a nightmarish attack by strangers. She told investigators that after closing up the store the previous night, she realized she'd forgotten her wallet and called Jana back to let her inside. According to Norwood, as the two re-entered the darkened shop around 10 p.m., 2 masked men slipped in behind them and unleashed unspeakable violence. Norwood claimed the intruders indecently assaulted both women and then brutally beat Jana when she tried to resist. They tied Norwood's hands and feet and left her alive, allegedly saying it was because she was, quote, more fun to assault. In her version of events, The attackers vanished into the night, leaving the community in fear. Norwood's account sent shockwaves through Bethesda and prompted an urgent manhunt for the supposed perpetrators. However, as detectives combed through the Lululemon store, they found that Norwood's story simply didn't add up. Clues at the scene increasingly pointed to an inside job rather than an attack by unknown intruders. Investigators immediately noticed inconsistencies in Norwood's story. There were no signs of forced entry, and only 2 sets of footprints in blood. One from Norwood's own shoes, and one from a pair of size 14 men's sneakers taken from the store's shelf. It appeared someone had used the large shoe to create fake tracks. Tellingly, none of those prints led outside, suggesting no intruders had ever been there. Moreover, medical examiners found 0 evidence of the alleged indecent assault, undermining one of Norwood's most dramatic claims. And despite describing a vicious struggle, Norwood's injuries were minor and appeared to be self-inflicted. These clues all pointed to a disturbing possibility. The quote-unquote survivor in the bathroom was actually the attacker. As Norwood repeated her story under questioning, more cracks began to show. She initially denied ever setting foot in Jana's car that night, yet detectives found a mix of Jana's and Brittany's blood smeared inside the vehicle. Confronted with this, Norwood admitted she had moved Jana's car, but she bizarrely claimed the masked men forced her to do it under threat. The more investigators learned, the more it became clear that Brittany Norwood herself had orchestrated the entire incident. The real motive soon came to light. On the night of March 11th, as the 2 women closed the store, Jana had discovered a pair of unpaid yoga pants in Norwood's bag during a routine bag check. Jana reported the suspected shoplifting to their manager after leaving, and it appears Norwood realized she'd been caught. Minutes later, Norwood contacted Jana, claiming she left her wallet at the store and needed to get back inside. Jana, trying to be helpful, agreed to return. Unfortunately, it was a trap. Once they were alone in the store again, Norwood attacked Jana in a furious rage. The ferocity of the assault didn't go unnoticed by others nearby. Employees working late next door at an Apple store overheard women screaming and one voice desperately pleading for her life. They never called 911, dismissing the commotion as just drama next door, unaware that they were hearing a slaying actively occurring next door. What followed was a prolonged and frenzied assault. Jana Murray suffered a staggering number of wounds inflicted with whatever weapons Norwood could grab from around the shop. Her skull was also fractured in the attack. In the aftermath of the attack, Brittany Norwood went to extraordinary lengths to cover up her crime. She spent over an hour methodically transforming the boutique into a fake crime scene to support her tale of violent intruders. First, she dragged Jana's lifeless body to the back hallway and placed a makeshift ligature around her neck, arranging the scene to appear as brutal as possible. Next, Norwood looted the cash registers and stole some money to make it look like the whole thing could have been a robbery that escalated to a truly disturbing level. She then sliced open Jana's pants with a box cutter to suggest there had been another motive for the assault. To fabricate the illusion of multiple attackers, Norwood put on the store's oversized men's sneakers, stepped in a pool of blood, and tracked bloody shoe prints through the store. She also knocked over merchandise and objects to simulate signs of a struggle. Finally, Norwood injured herself, cutting her forehead and causing a few superficial wounds, and bound her own wrists and ankles with zip ties before lying down in the bathroom. One of Norwood's most brazen moves was to drive Jana's car to a parking lot 3 blocks away, apparently to confuse the timeline of the crime. She likely sat in the car for nearly 90 minutes, refining her cover story before returning to the store. Inside the vehicle, police later found blood evidence linking Norwood to the car, a damning clue since she had insisted she was never in Jana's car that night. In reality, this calculated detour was just another part of her unintelligent attempt to stage the crime. Rather than diverting suspicion, it provided further proof that the entire incident was an inside job. With mounting evidence pointing to Brittany Norwood, police arrested her on March 18, 2011, exactly 1 week after Jana's slaying, and charged her with the crime. The community was stunned that the victim they had sympathized with was actually the perpetrator. Norwood's trial took place in late 2011 and lasted 6 days. Prosecutors methodically laid out the evidence of her guilt, from the staged footprints and fake injuries to the fact that she had lured Jana back to the store under false pretenses. The defense didn't dispute that Norwood had ended Jana's life, but argued that it was not premeditated. They hoped to reduce the charge by portraying the attack as a spontaneous explosion of anger rather than a planned act. In a notable move, the judge barred any mention of the stolen leggings during the trial, deeming it inadmissible evidence. Even without hearing about the theft motive, the jurors were unmoved by the defense's argument. Given the overwhelming evidence of Norwood's planning and the sheer brutality of the attack, they unanimously found her guilty in November 2011. In January 2012, a judge sentenced Brittany Norwood to life in prison without the possibility of parole, which was the maximum penalty available. Notably, had she pled guilty to the crime instead of mounting her bizarre and nonsensical defense, she may have had the opportunity to be paroled sometime later in her life. Jana Murray's family tearfully expressed relief that justice had been served, even as they continued to mourn the loss of their beloved daughter and friend. Teresita Sason was a 58-year-old mother living a quiet life in Fort Worth, Texas. She had lived in the neighborhood for around 4 years with her adult son, and no hint of trouble ever drew attention to their home. In April 2025, however, this unassuming family became the center of a horrifying tragedy. Teresita was found deceased in her own bedroom, and the shocking occult slaying would soon grip both the local community and national headlines. In the early morning hours of April 18, 2025, Fort Worth police received an alarming tip. An anonymous 911 caller reported seeing a disturbing image in a Snapchat group chat. The caller reported a photo of a woman lying on the ground, covered in what appeared to be blood. The caller provided the address associated with the sender of that photo, fearing the worst. Officers rushed to the residence on Farmers Branch Street at about 1:30 a.m., arriving to perform a welfare check. Nothing could have prepared them for what they were about to encounter at the quiet suburban home. They were about to come face to face with a vision of hell on earth. When police knocked on the door, Teresita's 23-year-old son answered, and immediately the scene turned surreal. The young man, identified by authorities as Alexander Taylor Valdez, appeared in the doorway with blood smeared on his face, chest, torso, hands, and feet. He was startlingly calm as he spoke to the officers, clutching a Bible the entire time he did so. According to the arresting officers, Valdez greeted them by matter-of-factly stating, quote, "It was an exorcism," as he stepped outside and sat down on the front porch. Officers quickly detained Valdez and began pressing him for an explanation of what was going on at the scene. When asked why he had blood all over him, the son gave an unsettling answer. "I was doing witchcraft to eliminate my mom," he allegedly confessed to the stunned police. The officers then asked if anyone else was inside the house, and Valdez responded plainly, "There is a dead body in there. It's my mom." His words were as chilling as the scene in front of the officers. It sounded as though Valdez truly believed he had been in the middle of some dark ritual. The notion that a mother could be slain by her own child under the pretext of an occult ritual was almost beyond comprehension. Nothing could soften the horror of what police found when they entered the home. In the master bedroom lay the body of Teresita, just like the Snapchat picture showed. She was found on the floor, drenched in blood, with severe trauma visible on her face and upper body. Tragically, officers also discovered the family's dog slain in the same room. Perhaps the dog had attempted to save its owner, or perhaps the animal was yet another cruel sacrifice. Signs of a violent struggle were everywhere, with blood on the walls and carpet, and amidst the chaos, a heavy wooden jewelry box was found broken and heavily stained. Strands of hair matching Teresita's were wedged into the box's splintered edges. Investigators believe this broken jewelry box was the blunt object used to bludgeon the victim. It was a ghastly scene, a level of brutality that would shock even seasoned investigators. Medics arrived and pronounced Teresita dead at the scene, though this was more of a formality given the brutality of the situation. According to the county medical examiner's report, she had perished from blunt force injuries to the head, just as investigators had initially thought. There was no question that this was a slaying, and the suspect was already in custody on the front lawn. As investigators began piecing together the timeline of events, they realized how crucial the social media tip had been. It turned out that after the fatal beating, Valdez had taken a photo of his mother's body and shared it in a Snapchat group chat with friends. In the image, Teresita's lifeless body and the also deceased dog were visible amid the bedroom. This shocking post is what prompted one horrified friend to call 911 and alert the authorities. In fact, a few of Valdez's friends rushed to the house themselves, arriving around the same time as officers. It was an unusual and grisly way for a crime to come to light, but without that Snapchat message, the disturbing act might have remained hidden for longer. Alexander Valdez was placed under arrest at the scene. Once in custody and away from the immediate chaos, he was questioned by Fort Worth detectives. There, however, the 23-year-old suspect refused to answer any further questions and quickly invoked his right to an attorney. Nevertheless, police had more than enough evidence to charge him. By daybreak, Valdez was booked into the county jail, now formally accused of slaying his own mother. In the days following the act, authorities confirmed the charges and began the legal process. A judge set his bond at $750,000, and jail records show Valdez remains in custody, having been unable to secure release. Sadly, the one person in his life who may have been there to bail him out was the exact person he had been accused of slaying. The case remains in its initial stages, and investigators have cautioned that there is still much work to do to understand why this event took place. As for the suspect's bizarre explanation, claiming an exorcism and witchcraft, officials had not offered any further insight into his state of mind. There was no immediate information on whether Valdez had a history of mental illness or unusual religious beliefs. The exorcism claim, as strange as it is, will likely be scrutinized by both prosecutors and any future defense attorneys as the case moves toward trial. While it's too early to tell at this point, some have speculated that this occult claim could be an after-the-fact attempt to build an insanity defense. However, for now, the focus for law enforcement is on building a solid case to ensure justice for Teresita. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here with a quick reminder to like and subscribe if you appreciate my content. Also, remember to check out my other channels, Lazy Chill Zone and Lazy Chill History, for unsolved mysteries and historical content. 19-year-old Jordan Cheyenne Nebling vanished on a quiet stretch of road in northern South Carolina in the fall of 2020. On October 10th of that year, her car broke down in a rural area outside the small town of Travelers Rest. A concerned local resident noticed the stranded car and spoke with the young woman. Jordan seemed calm and assured the passerby that someone was coming to help her. Moments later, around 1:30 p.m., a car pulled up and Jordan got inside. What happened after that roadside encounter has haunted her family and puzzled investigators for years. That is, until very recently. To those who knew her, Jordan was a charismatic and warm-hearted young woman. But despite this, her early life hadn't been easy, and she and her older sister spent time in foster care. Despite these challenges, Jordan was outgoing and had a way of making friends easily. Like many teenagers, Jordan went through a rebellious phase. She also struggled with substance problems in her mid-teens and got involved in an abusive relationship, which lasted about 2 years. The name of her boyfriend was Tyler Wilkins, a name you'll want to remember going forward. By the time she turned 19, Jordan was determined to turn her life around. In the fall of 2020, she had passed a substance test, landed a new job she was excited about, and was repairing her relationship with her family. For the first time in a long time, things seemed to be looking up for Jordan. In early October 2020, shortly before her disappearance, Jordan was spending time with a new boyfriend she had recently begun dating. On October 9th, she and this man borrowed a car to take a road trip from Travelers Rest to the town of Cowpens, South Carolina, to visit some friends. Later that day, however, the man left Cowpens with another friend, reportedly leaving Jordan to return home on her own, using the borrowed car. Jordan decided to stay overnight and drive back the next day. On October 10th, she began the roughly hour-long drive home toward Travelers Rest. As fate would have it, the car started having mechanical trouble along Old White Horse Road, a sparsely populated stretch on the outskirts of town. Jordan managed to pull over in front of a house, and a person living there came outside to check on the situation. Jordan explained that her car had broken down, but that she had contacted someone to pick her up. She used her phone to reach out for help, and as fate would have it, the person she called was her ex-boyfriend, Tyler Wilkins, who lived nearby. A witness saw Tyler arrive and saw Jordan stepping into Tyler's car, and from that point on, she simply dropped off the face of the earth. When Jordan's family didn't hear from her for the rest of that weekend, they initially weren't alarmed. Jordan was an adult and had in the past been out of touch for a few days at a time. But as the days stretched into weeks with no word, her older sister grew increasingly concerned. After more than 2 weeks with absolutely no contact, Jordan's sister reached out to her former foster mother for help, and she was immediately alarmed. Jordan had maintained an extremely strong relationship with her former foster mother, with some sources even indicating that she had adopted Jordan. Jordan's biological mother, who Jordan was living with at the time, had not yet reported her missing. She believed that perhaps Jordan had just run off for a while and would eventually come back on her own, but others disagreed and felt that something was wrong. On November 8th, 2020, nearly a month after anyone had last seen Jordan, she was finally reported as missing. Sadly, it was only at this point that the Greenville County Sheriff's Office opened an investigation into Jordan Nebling's disappearance. Once law enforcement got involved, they moved quickly to piece together Jordan's last known movements. Investigators learned about the borrowed car breaking down and that Jordan had called her ex-boyfriend for help. 19-year-old Tyler Wilkins became the central figure in those early inquiries, as the last person known to have seen her. Deputies brought him in for questioning, and Tyler confirmed the basic story. He acknowledged that he picked Jordan up on the afternoon of October 10th, after her car trouble. he told detectives that he drove her to the house where he was staying. According to Tyler, the two of them got into an argument not long after arriving. Jordan, he claimed, decided to walk away from the house on foot. He said she left angrily and disappeared down the rural road, and he had no idea where she went after that. That was his story, that Jordan walked off into the afternoon and never came back. It was a strange account. If true, it meant Jordan would have been alone, on foot, in a remote area with few houses around, and her family found the story unlikely. They knew Jordan would have called someone for help, or returned home if she could. Law enforcement, too, treated the situation as suspicious. Almost immediately, foul play was suspected in Jordan's disappearance, but there was no hard evidence to pin on anyone. Deputies searched the area around Tyler's residence and other places Jordan was known to visit. They looked for any trace of the missing young woman, a piece of clothing, her cell phone, any sign of a struggle, but found nothing. Investigators even dug up a concrete slab on Tyler's property. This slab was believed to have been poured around the time Jordan vanished, and the authorities thought he might have hidden something beneath it. That search, like many others, turned up no clues. For a time, Jordan Nebling's case went cold, with no arrests and no answers. A shocking and tragic event in November 2022 would end up casting new light on Jordan's case. On the night of November 9th, 2022, Greenville County deputies responding to a call walked into a grisly crime scene at a home on Sawmill Road. Inside, they discovered 22-year-old Clarissa Winchester, who had been reported missing earlier that day. To make matters even more tragic, they found her newborn baby, also deceased. Investigators were horrified to learn that Clarissa's boyfriend, and the father of the infant, was none other than Tyler Wilkins. Evidence indicated that Clarissa had been held captive and brutally slain, and that her infant son had been simply left to perish after not being provided the necessities of life. Wilkins was arrested and charged in relation to these truly heinous crimes. The news sent shockwaves through the community, and for Jordan Nebling's family, the development was especially chilling. The man long suspected of knowing more about Jordan's disappearance was now an accused perpetrator in a revolting case. Many people drew the same conclusion that the family had, believing the coincidence was simply too great. If Tyler Wilkins was capable of this kind of horrific violence, perhaps he had also harmed Jordan back in 2020. Despite the suspicion, however, investigators still lacked concrete proof connecting Wilkins to Jordan's presumed death. Throughout 2023, Tyler remained behind bars awaiting trial, and Jordan's case remained officially unsolved. It wasn't until late 2024 that some measure of justice was delivered in the Clarissa Winchester case, and from there, the dominoes would fall, bringing justice to Jordan too. In September 2024, Tyler Wilkins pleaded guilty to his heinous acts and was sentenced to 45 years in prison for that crime. Yet even as that chapter closed, the mystery of Jordan Nebling's disappearance persisted. Jordan's family still had no answers, no remains to lay to rest, and no closure. Law enforcement, for their part, never gave up on the case. Over the course of more than 4 years, the Greenville County Sheriff's Office had chased every lead they could find regarding Jordan. They combed through forests and fields, interviewed dozens of people, and analyzed phone records and data, all in the hopes of finding evidence of what became of the missing woman. But at the start of 2025, a major break finally arrived. Perhaps understanding he had nothing left to lose, Tyler Wilkins decided to talk. In early 2025, while incarcerated, Wilkins confessed to investigators that he had indeed slain Jordan on that day in October 2020. According to statements later released by authorities, he admitted that he brought her back to her home, as he had initially advised the authorities. Further, he admitted that an intense argument between the two individuals did indeed occur. However, what wasn't true is that she didn't simply wander off his property. Instead, he had slain her. This confession came to no surprise to anyone who heard the initial story and knew of his history of extreme violence. In April 2025, the Greenville County Sheriff's Office publicly announced the development and stated they were charging Tyler Wilkins with the slaying of Jordan. Yet one heartbreaking question remains unanswered. What did Tyler do with her remains? Despite the confession, Wilkins hasn't yet revealed the location of Jordan's body, and searches have so far not recovered her remains.